A special message from Congressman Elijah Cummings.
I'm fighting at the federal level to protect our children from lead poisoning. At the state level, I defer to the wisdom of my colleagues in the Maryland legislature. But I do know this. In every community, lead paint continues to poison Maryland's children at alarming rates. We've all paid the price. Parents with poisoned kids, schools with learning disabled students, landlords with unrentable properties, and all of us with rising healthcare costs. So I asked my friends in Annapolis this question. Isn't it time that we ask lead paint producers to become part of the solution to this deadly problem? With all due respect, I think it is. And I thank you.
More than 100 years ago, doctors determined that lead paint was poisonous to children, causing brain damage and even death. By 1928, many countries around the world had banned lead paint. But here at home, the 8 lead paint manufacturers formed an association that successfully fought for half a century all attempts to ban lead paint. A ban in 1978 didn't stop a toxic legacy that still exists today.
The medical literature beginning in 1904, first out of Australia and then in 1914 out of Baltimore itself, indicated and showed that children were accumulating lead in their bodies from the paint on walls, and they were slowly getting lead poisoned. So this is not new knowledge. It's also knowledge that the industry itself was aware of for a century. As early as 1904, Sherwin-Williams and other paint manufacturers have identified that children are being poisoned. The documents are pretty damning. You see them discussing in their internal minutes what they understood as the problem, and then you see their advertisements which completely negate and completely ignore the problem.
Despite knowing the dangers and deadly consequences, the American lead paint industry embarked on an advertising and marketing campaign aimed at children.
They gave out paint books where the Dutch boy literally, through this paint book, taught children how to mix lead paint, how to put tints in it, how to paint their walls, how to paint their furniture and their toys, and their beds and everything around them. They identified lead as a benefit to society, and they saw all the information that was coming out about lead being a poison as essentially a bad public relations moment. That's so tragic because we had literally 100 years of children who were being lead poisoned with an industry that never wanted to take responsibility, never identified the problem, and did everything they could to suppress this problem. The very material that's been poisoning children for a century is still all around those children. Children who are living in older housing, and not that old, but housing built before 1978 and 1960s, undoubtedly have exposures at different moments. Every time you renovate a building, every time you knock a hole in the wall, every time you put a new fixture in, every time you put a nail in the wall to hang a picture, you're releasing lead.
Go into houses, whether they be in Roland Park or in Sandtown, Winchester, or Upper Marlboro in Prince George's County or Allegheny County or on the Eastern Shore. It doesn't matter. You're likely to find in the corner the chipping, peeling, flaking paint that seems so innocuous, but can have really important and very detrimental effects on children. And these are effects that are irreversible. A child is poisoned at 2 is the child that we deal with in the school system when they're 8 and they can't read as well, when they're 14 or 15 and stop going to school and drop out of school. Kids are 7 times more likely to drop out. There's impacts on society in terms of an increased rate of juvenile crime and violent behavior. And there's clearly impacts for kids who, when they cannot learn as well, they cannot compete.
In early 2007, Liz and Steve Baker were surprised to discover that their son Matthew had a high enough lead level to cause behavioral and developmental disabilities. He had been poisoned in their Hamden home.
It was really interesting because, of course, I started doing an amazing amount of research trying to figure out and talking to the pediatrician and various people that we know, and that it was terrifying the effects that lead paint could have on a child's health. I'm sitting here looking at my vibrant, lively, intelligent child and thinking, what could happen? I mean, it was really terrifying.
At a well baby visit, Shantae Wagner learned that her son Lamonte had a high lead level. An investigation of their rented apartment revealed 75 violations of Baltimore's lead paint code. The Wagners immediately moved out, but it may have been too late to prevent harm.
He's my miracle, my blessing. So I don't want to lose him to anything like this.
Neither family may know for several years the total extent of damage to their son's brain.
We had an issue with Matthew's preschool about some of his behavior and his impulsiveness, and my first thought is, oh my God, it's the lead. And I said to Steve, it's something I hate to say will be in the back of my mind the rest of this kid's life.
I want my baby to have the best care. I want him to be able to develop again eventually, if possible. So somebody needs to be held accountable, or somebody needs to be able to help me assist him to be able to grow.
There is no turning back on this emotional and expensive journey.
How people pay for this, for 3 windows, 2 doors, and some trim, is $18,000.
From the health care to the therapy to, speech, all of that costs.
Every parent who has a lead-poisoned child has had to pay in some sense. Every health department that's had to go in to detoxify homes has had to pay. Every school system that has to set up special education classes has to pay. Every hospital or every governmental agency that has to pay for Medicaid costs because children are damaged and have to be chelated has to pay. And of course, the most despicable is the fact that the children have to pay.
Maryland taxpayers bear the brunt of the economic cost of lead poisoning. Massive public health, criminal justice, and education spending combine with lost tax revenue to gouge a deep hole in the state's budget. The only one who has not paid for the toxic legacy of lead paint is the lead paint industry itself. These companies have avoided all legal responsibility because under current Maryland law, you must identify the exact brand of paint in question. The Maryland Lead Poisoning Recovery Act will allow individuals and governments to finally take action against the lead industry for the damage caused by its product.
It's awful hard to figure out which specs of paint from which manufacturer was ingested by the child. It's absurd to think that you can prove that with reasonable certainty. When the law is incapable of actually providing appropriate legal redress for those who are injured by those who are causing their injury, then the law needs to be modified. The fundamental principle underlying all of the law of tort is fault, that he who bears fault should bear the risk of loss. And clearly the lead paint manufacturers are the people at fault. Maryland is simply trying to affix responsibility for the poisoning of its cities and the people who live in its cities on those who willfully, deliberately, and for profit poisoned the cities.
There is no cure for lead poisoning. The costs to children, families, and government are enormous. It is past time for the lead industry to share in the responsibility for the toxic legacy of its paint.
I think it's really so crucial that this bill gets passed through. The resources that it takes to get this work done are extraordinary, and it just seems to me that the people who are responsible for it should really be helping with the process. It's just the right thing to do.